Hello, Terry.
How we doing?
Do you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, everything is okay. Everything is perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much for opportunity to talk about your career and about NBA from 80s and 90s. I appreciate this. But
No problem.
before I will ask you about the NBA period, could you tell me, when you were a kid, uh, which players were the best for you?
I grew up in the era where I followed Dr. J, Kareem, uh, some of the older guys, the Adolph Shays, Cousy, Elgin Baylor. Uh, so I was watching them, but a lot more of the current cats that were playing the game when I was younger. The Chicago Bulls, for instance, since I'm from Chicago, would have had
Mhm.
Mickey Johnson and Norm Van Leer, Jerry Sloan, those guys. I would have followed them on television, but I'm a late bloomer. I didn't really um, play basketball as much as I played baseball and hockey. I was a hockey player first, and then baseball. But then I grew over one summer. I grew about 8 or 9 inches, so I grew into basketball.
Yes, and this answer appeared many times when I asked, for example, Terry Porter about the reason why basketball. He told me that the first was football, and then he became taller, and that was the reason
Yeah.
to choose basketball. And
Yeah, well, most basketball players tend to be multifaceted in terms of sports that they play. They tend to be the better athletes, all around athletes. So they play a lot more sports before they settle on one. Well, that's been the history that I found of it anyway.
so you became taller. You choose basketball, and in 1982 were selected by San Diego Clippers, with the second overall pick. How do you remember the day? Do you expected that you will be the prospect choose with this high pick?
No, I think back then, you always have inside information going on among the agents and general managers, and they talk to each other, and you find out where you're going to come. I didn't know that I would be that high a pick. Um, I knew the closer I got to it, I was going to be either one, two, or three. As it turned out with the draft, I wound up being number two and going to the Clippers. But either one of us, myself, James Worthy, Dominique Wilkins, could have wound up in LA. They chose James. I went to San Diego, and Dominique wound up in Atlanta.
And was there some kind of competition between you and James Worthy? You both were in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Same
Well,
draft.
I didn't get to play there. I left the year they moved up. The year they moved to LA, the Clippers moved to LA. I got traded to Milwaukee. I didn't
Uh-huh.
want to necessarily live and play in Los Angeles. But yeah, always, because I thought he was definitely, when we played them, I always turned my game up a whole nother notch. It was like going to Boston or Chicago or New York. You play your best ball against the best players, the best teams.
Mm-hmm. And you played with Bill Walton. So I guess that at the beginning of your, at the first steps in the NBA, you've got really talented but unlucky big player. And how do you remember your cooperation with Bill? Was he mentor for you?
Well, yeah, Bill was a bit of a rebel, so he was always funny. He gave a lot of information, lots of advice, talked a whole lot. He didn't play as much because
Mm-hmm.
his foot was injured by the time I got there.
Mm-hmm.
But he was really a good guy to play with because he really gave real important information about how the game was played. And young players need to come in and understand that it's not just about the game, but the politics of the game as well. So you have to understand the administrative side of it and understand that the game itself is revolutionary. I mean, it transcends everything: social, spiritual, political. It's all those people are connected.
Mm-hmm. And it was also very lucky draft for San Diego Clippers because They also choose Tom Chambers, another talented tall guy.
Hmm.
And you
Very talented.
yes, you played with him in Clippers as well in
Hmm.
the Sixers a couple of years
Right.
later. Could you tell me about him as a player and a teammate? How do you remember him?
He was a good guy, real solid kind of dude. You know, he spoke his mind, and a lot of times with people like us who have a mind to speak, people don't really want to hear your mind. They just want you to say okay to everything. And Tommy wasn't that kind of guy. Very prolific scorer. I mean, long, could jump. He was one of the first white guys I knew that could literally jump, and black guys were talking about the white boy down in San Diego. Be careful because he'll dunk on you.
Mhm.
And the black players always wanted to believe that they never get dunked on by someone white. Well, Tommy would posterize people. You know, he
Mhm.
was a really good player, good guy too.
And but of course, in the first season, you were playing together, and it was better for you because you became the Rookie of the Year. You received this award. You've got uh, as for the rookie, it was tremendous statistics with 23.7 points per game and 10.4 rebounds. What did you learn in this year about the NBA, about how to be a good player? What was the crucial in this season?
Well, I think my rookie year was just kind of figuring out how the game was played, and I think the toughest part of being in the NBA initially was not the game because I was playing. I had been playing against pro athletes since I was 16 or 17 in Chicago, and we would play our pro am. Our summer pro am would be in Chicago, so all the cats would come back from all over the country that played pro ball and outside the country that played in the international sports, and they would come to the league. So I got my feet wet then. The most difficult part of making the transition was learning the travel schedule because I played 30 35 games a season in college. And I learned in my first year in the league that I was going to play 3 college seasons in 1 year, you know, with preseason and the regular season games. And we didn't make the playoffs until I got to Milwaukee. So my first 2 years, it was like just learning to deal with the discipline of disciplining your body and making sure you're prepared to play, but how you eat, you sleep, take care of yourself on and off the court. You know, you don't do anything that jeopardizes what is important, which is the team.
Mhm. And how did it change the traveling in the NBA when you compare the early 80s and, for example, mid 90s? Was it? I guess that it's always was exhausted in the 90s, but when you could compare 80s and 90s, was it like a hell and heaven, or that wasn't so bad?
It may be more like hell than heaven because in the 80s, you had a lot more responsibilities that were delegated to the players, and then teams did not fly private. They all flew with the regular people, you know, and then you got a leg room seat first class or exit row based on your number of years in the league. So if you were a young guy, a lot of times you were sitting with your knees to your chest, no matter how long or short the flight was. But for me, because I was drafted high and I was playing a lot, I was telling them I'm not sitting in no seat with my knees to my chest and then getting off the plane and going to the arena to play. So you all need to figure that out, you
Mhm.
know. But the biggest difference, I think, one of them was that we in the 80s we flew commercial. In the 90s we were flying private, and which was really good because as soon as the game was over in the 90s, you were packing up that same night, flying to the next city, which meant you got to sleep in a bed that night. You didn't have to sleep 3 or 4 hours in the 80s and get up 5 or 6 in the morning or before and fly to another city to connect to get to where you're going. You know, we're going directly there in the 90s. And then in the 80s, we carried our own uniforms, all our own things. We had to wash our uniforms. And being with the Clippers, you know, you kind of were on the low end of the NBA stature at the time. So we were catching cabs instead of buses. You know, the buses pick you up from the airport, take you to the hotel. We would catch the cabs and 2 and 3 to a cab pay. They would reimburse you stuff that you on that level you wouldn't have thought you would have had to do. But once I left San Diego and got to Milwaukee, it transitioned. I mean, the team took care of more things, and it made it easier on you to just focus on getting ready for the game.
Mm-hmm.
And then the 90s came, it was with San Antonio then, and we had our own plane, and so that made a big difference. I believe it helped me to play 18 years in the league too, because you didn't have all of that. Got to get up, got to pack, got to get to the downstairs to the bus, from the bus to the airport, connect on the flight, and then by the time you get there, the coaches tended to want to practice because the next day was a game. Because I think it was part of the uniform agreement was that you have to be there the day before, the night before the game. So it was a lot. It was a lot on us. You didn't know any better because that was what everybody was doing then. But the moment we got a private plane and the league turned to private jets and stuff like that, most players' careers were extended because of that, in part.
Mm-hmm.
You still got to take care of yourself.
It sounds like this traveling was kind of tough training.
Yeah.
It put a lot of effort and energy as well. You mentioned about Milwaukee Bucks, because after 2 years in San Diego Clippers, you were traded with Ricky Pierce and Craig Hodges to the Bucks. And what was your first reaction? Did you expect this move?
I expected. I had a dream that I was being traded, and I knew that I was either going to Boston or Milwaukee. And I told the San Diego Clipper owner that I wanted to go to Milwaukee because it's a couple hours down the road by car from my hometown, Chicago. Okay. And I thought it would be a good mix for me, and it turned out to be a really good move for me.
Mm-hmm. You've got a really great team. There was, for example, Sidney Moncrief or Jack Sigma, mentioned Ricky Pierce, but it was the Celtic time and also the 76ers. And how it was played against Larry Bird or Julius Erving,
it was the best. It was really playing against the best is always been something I always thrived on. And I thought that it wasn't just them. Those were the teams at the top you had to pass through to get through. But you had Cleveland, you had Indiana, you had New York, you had New Jersey, Philadelphia, of course. I mean, you had a lot of great teams in the East. I mean, it's not like what we watch in the NBA now. You got one or two, maybe 3 or 4 teams. Back then in the East, you had about 7 to 8 teams that were winning 50-plus games a season and were easily capable of coming out of the East.
Mm-hmm.
Very competitive.
You've got really good players and coaching staff as well. When I talked with Sidney Moncrief, he mentioned that Don Nelson was the best coach he played for, and that the fact that he is now in the Hall of Fame, it's thanks of him and his coaching strategy. And the same.
Say again?
Do you have the same when we are talking about the Don Nelson, that he was really important for you as a player?
Oh, yeah. Because I thought that I had 2 coaches. I had a different coach every year I was in San Diego, and both were different styles. Paul Silas was a former player, and then the other coach, he was the coach at St. Joe's in Philadelphia, and he was a college coach this was his first tenure in the NBA, and it was very different and difficult, I'm sure, because that transition can be difficult if you coach college or collegiate style on a pro level. It doesn't quite go together. Mm-hmm. But when I got to Milwaukee, Don Nelson was the first coach that really took me under his wing, gave me next level training, and he told me coming in the door what he expected out of me, and that's what I provided. He told me defend, rebound, score, and because I hadn't quite gotten down the concept of the team defense thing, but the most complicated form of offense and defense I would ever have in my whole NBA career was that which Don Nelson taught. I mean, our defensive and offensive books were about this thick, and he expected you not only to know your position, you had to know every other player's position. The point guard, the small guard, the 3, the small forward, the power forward. in the Big Four, because in his system, anyone could play any position. So you had to know all the positions, but he was one of the, to me, was the genius behind him is where the league is now. I mean, the whole game they're playing now is Don Nelson ball, what he calls small ball.
Mm-hmm.
Draw and kick, drive to the basket, draw the defense, kick the ball to the open man. That is all the NBA is doing now, and that is the genius of Don Nelson. That's not somebody. Didn't nobody else come up with that. That was him doing it before anybody else did. He did it in Milwaukee before he did it with Mullins them in Golden State.
Mm-hmm.
Tim Hardaway and those guys.
Yeah, so I guess that after 6 seasons, you were traded to San Antonio Spurs. It was tough to leave the place where was so good coaching. And Alvin Robertson told me that he wasn't satisfied with this trade when he had to go to Bucks. And how about you? Because from Alvin Robertson's perspective, it was, oh my God, I could play with David Robinson, and he didn't, and you could. And so how do you feel about this trade?
I didn't like it at first, but then when I got to San Antonio and realized, sometimes, you have to realize you just don't know what's in front of you, and you have to accept change as it comes. And I knew then, I think at that point, I was probably, so I played 5 years. I was about in my 8th or 9th year in the league. So, I was at 30, 31, 32 years old and transitioning, because at that point they consider you old anyway in the NBA, and so I was transitioning and learning how to accept the fact that my role would diminish at some point, but until it does, I need to provide the best me I can. And so they brought me into San Antonio to mentor David Robinson and Sean Elliott. And then we had a really good team. It was just really young. I mean, that team could have just slept up and won just because it was young and didn't know it didn't belong there. But that was probably one of the teams when I got traded to the Spurs. The coach was Larry Brown, who was very formidable as a college coach and a pro coach as well. And he was a great teacher. To me, him and Don Nelson were the two greatest teachers in my life when it came to basketball. And Larry tended to transcend more to teaching basketball as that thing that also applied to life. You can look at basketball and you can see life. You can look at life and see basketball, because they all intertwine. And he was a great teacher and a motivator. So, I mean, I really enjoyed playing for him too. I learned a lot from him.
And life sometimes is really tough. And you got an injury, really serious. How do you remember this moment when you realized that you won't play for some time?
I tore my knee up. To be honest, I was thinking about this the other day, because I had been praying and just telling Lord I was tired, I was worn out, and I needed a break, and I didn't know how it would come, but I don't. I looked at it simply like this, and I've always been this way. Anything that comes in my life, I'm just going to accept it for what it is, not blow it out of proportion, not make it smaller than it is, and I'm gonna defeat it. And so when tearing up my ACL playing outside in a pickup game, and something I've been doing all my career because it kept me sharp during the off seasons, and I just made up in my mind, that I knew I had to change my mind about being the man, and that as far as playing time and scoring and stuff like that, but that I then changed my concept of how I saw myself to being that guy that came off the bench to sustain leads for the starters, to make the bench a better team than the starters. I mean, that was always my approach. Once I came out of the starting lineup, I wanted to be the best, player off the bench I could be, and make the bench, the second team, better than the first. We would wear those teams out over the years. My last 5 or 6 years, it was just a big thing, because it was normally made up of veterans like myself who had been the man on their teams before they got there. So we knew what the requirement was to help the starters maintain leads. If they gave us a lead, we either held the lead or we extended the lead so that it was bigger by the time they came back in the game. And then that was, to me, that is the role of the bench, is to make sure that you take a lead and build it up or hold it until the starters come back in and can win the game.
Mm-hmm. So first was that from one of the main offensive weapons in the San Antonio, we became the role player from the bench, and then general manager Greg Popovich told you that you didn't fit to their new strategy. And how does it look? It looks from your perspective. I guess that you spent a lot of seasons in the team, with a lot of effort, especially after injury, and suddenly the front of office told you that you wouldn't be Spurs anymore.
Well, I was really disappointed because I had put so much into the community, into the team, into the players. And it's not always just business. Sometimes it's just the way things are handled. And I dispute that only as a man, not necessarily as an athlete. I just think, I've run companies since I was about 21 or 22 years old. And really, the one thing you owe people is to do things with a perspective that is not just professional, but that shows respect to that person as well. And I felt that it was a bit mishandled with me, but over time I looked at it from a distance and said to myself that, sometimes we do what is the best we can do with what tools we have to do it with. And so we have to respect the fact that everybody's not going to handle you the way you would handle them.
Mm-hmm.
And so as time went on, you heal up inside. You look at your scenario when you leave San Antonio for the first time in my NBA career. I'm actually free to be who I really am in totality. I'm not just a rebounder. I'm not just a scorer. I'm not just a leader. I'm not just one of the guys, but I'm all of these. And when I get to these other teams, I go back to Milwaukee for a year. Then I go to Seattle. Then I go to Philadelphia, New York, and wind up in Golden State. But in each step, each one of those teams, I'm elevated more and more in the sight of the ownership, the administration, the administrators, and the players, because they need leadership. But they need leadership that can still play and show and prove it on the court. And that was made for me.
Mm-hmm. You went back to Milwaukee, and there were a really talented front court. Vin Baker, Glenn Robinson. How it was to be a mentor for them?
Huh? Say that again.
How it was to be a mentor for these young players like Vin Baker and.
No, I enjoyed it. I was really thriving. I thrived on it. I knew how important it was for not just the team, but more important for the guys. Because I think sometimes the worst thing can happen is when you have older guys around, but they won't open their mouth because they're too busy, collecting salary, and they're concerned about their future. And I get that. But if you're going to have older guys around, they have to have a level of commitment to the vision of the owner, to the vision of the general manager, the coach, and more importantly, they must have a vision within themselves of why they're there. Because you can do so many other things. And we've often said, the older guys used to say to us when I was younger, they would say that this money that you make in the NBA is the easiest money you will ever make in your life. You could be out doing a pile driver or painting a house or, laying concrete. Those are really tough jobs. We got to do what we love doing and got paid well, So there was I think you have to have, even now, you need experienced guys around your younger guys to teach them the ropes, because the ropes don't just include X and O's. It also includes the lifestyle that goes along with the game itself. All the people around that have their hands out that are trying to take from you what you're out there working for. And because you think that they're your friends, you might give it to them and you'll wind up broke. And all of those so-called friends will disappear, So.
As you said, that many times that playing in the NBA, as you mentioned, it's a gift, and also many times the dream comes true. And but it's really tough. You need to put the effort on it. And now we've got the Last Dance, and I also saw you in the first episode. And when in the 6th episode, they are talking about the Michael Jordan and the crisis which was in the NBA Finals with New York Knicks, that many times people want to be like Mike, but being a Mike with this pressure, with the effort which he put in the gym, on the court, it was for just the common man. Being a Mike with the 1 day, 1 week, many times impossible. But as I said, if your dream comes true and you put effort and work every day really hard, so it could be really good to be in the NBA.
Yeah, if your goal is only to win championships, if your goal is only to be on a team with Mike, and I was given an opportunity, I believe I was playing. I had left New York and was going to Golden State, and I had gotten a call. Well, actually, I got a call when I had left San Antonio. So a couple years after that, I got a call from the Chicago people, and they wanted me to come. Dennis was on his way there, and they wanted me to come as well. And I told them no. And I told them I just, as a matter of my own integrity, I know a lot of guys are coming to you all at the end of their careers to get a ring. And I said, and I don't want that ring. You know, I'm very comfortable with who I am. I don't want to come there and I can still play. I don't want to sit on my career end on the bench. And I want it to end with me still being able to play, still being able to help a team for whatever purpose or reason it is they brought me in. I want to give that to them. But I'm not going to sit here and die. And I'm not going to babysit Dennis Rodman because I'm a better player than that. And I'm a better man. And so, you know, my thing was I chose not to go there, not because of Michael and how Michael strategizes, because me and him played on the same Pro-Am league in Chicago for Playboy for about 5 or 6 years or more. And we win championships left and right against all the other former NBA players, overseas players, pros. And so we would talk and stuff. And I think if you have a level of commitment to what you believe in, whatever your goal or your vision is, you can connect with a vision like what Mike had for his teams there and the ownership and coaches did without it being a problem. I mean, if it's a problem, it's just because you ain't got the ethic, you know, the work ethic behind it. And plus, balling is balling. You got to get out there and get it done. And whatever your role or responsibility is, if you can't do it, move out the way and let somebody else do it, you know.
Love to basketball was more important for you than another jewelry on the finger.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you only live for that, that's a difficult thing anyway, because that means that nothing else matters. And for me, basketball was the most important thing for me when I played, when the game was on. When the game was over, I had a family that was waiting for me, a wife, children. And I anticipated getting home and being with my family, and I didn't bring my game home, and I didn't take it home to the court. And for
was
some
it easy?
people,
Was it easy to divide it? Your being
a lot easier for me. Yeah, a lot easier for me than maybe the average guy, because I came into the league a preacher, a minister, and I believe that my call over those years since I was 16 years old really helped balance me. And it gave me a kind of a steady, constant mind that this is not the end all. This is just bricks being laid on the future, the platform or the foundation of what you'll do after this is done. So don't put this above God. Don't put it above your future. Don't put it above your family. You know, put everything in perspective. Keep it in perspective. Don't sell your soul to it, because it's not that important in the end. It's not, you know. I mean, all the trophies and all the accolades you get. You know, I came home one day and I looked, you know, you got Rookie of the Year, you got Player of the Year in college, you got all of these trophies in here, and you don't even notice them. I mean, you come in the door week after week, day after day, month after month, year after year, and you don't even notice it. It takes someone coming to your home, visiting you, and they're oohing and awing over it for you to remember you even did those things. You know, and the reason for it with me is that my mind has moved to the next thing. It's not stuck there, and it wasn't stuck there when I was doing it. You know, it's about building your future. You don't get stuck in those things, and I think for some people, the only life they have and the only identity they have is in that round ball, which they can't do anymore, you know. So all of that stuff was good when you did it, but and you can build your future off of that, but you still have to do something that is more modern and more consistent with where you are now, so people can apply both of them together,
Mhm.
or all three, the past, present, and future.
Mhm.
So for me, I've been preparing for it for years, before I
Mhm.
got out of it.
Mhm. I've got also some questions about your life after basketball, but let me ask you also about two players, two guards, Gary Payton, Allen Iverson, one of the most and the best trash talkers during in the whole NBA history. And who was better in discipline, Allen or Gary?
Mm, I think that they were both like desperados, rebels. Having played with both of them, but I think when it came to the the game itself, they were two individuals that locked in and got really focused when the game was on.
Mhm.
I don't think that either one of them cared too much for practice, but would practice. I mean, Gary would come, and Al might or might not show up, you know. But they showed up for the games. They came and played, and I mean, it was different for me because I was brought up with the old heads and who believe that the way you practice is the way you play. And it's unfortunate at times. I know with Al, we would play, and we would be on the bus, getting on the bus to go to practice, and Al is just getting into the hotel.
Uh-huh.
And so he's tired and worn out from that, and he want to go to the room, get some sleep, so he'd be prepared to play the night. Meanwhile, the rest of the team has to go to the shoot around, go over the opposing team's offense and defense without him, because even if he's there, he got a hoodie on and he's not there. So it was different, but I didn't want to be politically correct about how I answered you. But they're two different players. They had their own little quirky little things that they believed about practice and games and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But both of them showed up to play every night.
When you talk about the practice and how it was important for you, I guess that your relation on this ground was really difficult with Alan, because we know, as you said, also how he look at the practice. But sometimes I think about what would be if he would be more focused on the practicing. Maybe we wouldn't see Iverson in this shape. Maybe his way, his style, basketball style, not connected with the practice. Was this furious, but it was effective for the team on the court.
Um, I mean, I think it affected the team, but I think thing is, he had the ball in his hands 70, 80, 90% of the time. So if he was on, he was on. And if he was having a terrible game, he was having a terrible game, and everybody else had to pick up. So it does affect, especially when it's the main guy on the team. He's the head guy, the guy that all the press is going to run to, and all of that. But I do say this about Iverson as well as Gary. I mean, they just laced them up and came to play every night. No matter what
Mhm.
they did the night before or the day of, they came to play, on game days. And
Mhm.
yes, it does affect you. I would be lying to you if I told you otherwise. It does affect the team, but at the same time, that was the way it was.
Mhm. And when you have to choose one team, which team is the biggest in your heart when you look at your career?
I got to play some of my best basketball in Milwaukee, in San Antonio. I love playing in the first three teams: San Diego, Milwaukee, San Antonio. Milwaukee by far, because I had been away from my family for 2 years, so it was really good to see my siblings and stuff more often than not. But as far as cities and I played in all three of those had this in common: they were all small markets. San Diego, Milwaukee, San Antonio, and it wasn't until I left San Antonio that I got to play in other markets where they were huge markets,
Mhm.
New York, Seattle, Philadelphia, and of course, Golden State, because it's San Francisco and Oakland, the Bay Area. But those I enjoyed playing more at the end of my career than I did at the beginning. And the reason for it was I was a complete player at the end of my career because I no longer had to rely on just scoring and rebounding. I could defend. You know, I would get the biggest, strongest, quickest player at the 3, 4, 5 spot. And I was, even up to the time I was 40 years old, I was sticking them at the end of the game, you know, being a stopper. And I took more pride in that than scoring toward the end. I was definitely a much more complete player. I wasn't playing as many minutes, but then I didn't need to. I was old enough where I didn't have anything to prove, but I wanted to make sure that if I were to lead the guys, the younger guys, that they saw me doing what I was telling them they needed to do, you know.
And how do you remember your time spent in New York? Because it's a big market, as you mentioned, and I guess that's a bigger pressure and also more expectation. You played with Patrick Ewing as well. And how do you remember this time?
Oh, it was I loved, like I said, I loved those last 6, 7 years of my career. Playing in New York, I'd always thought that New York was at the pinnacle as far as fans and as a culture of understanding sports, especially basketball, having had a history of it, a great history themselves. So I always wanted to play in the Garden. I played there in college and all those years in the pro ranks as well. So to get a chance to play in New York, I was like, when I got the call about it, I was like, yeah, I'm in. I'm going to New York. I want to go play in New York. And I mean, I actually lived in the city, drove from the city to where the practice site was about 30, 40 minutes away, one way, and drove back afterwards. But to me, that was all a part of earning the right to be there, learning the culture and everything of the city and the state and the people, you know. But New York was like one of the fondest memories I have of playing in the NBA is playing it in Madison Square Garden.
Mhm. You mentioned that after your career in NBA, you could spend more time. You spent still more time with family, and also know that you are a singer. I guess that's still active.
Yeah, yeah, I do a lot of that when I can. I'm in ministry now 43 years, so there's almost always music involved in ministry. But I also do shows where we actually perform R&B type music, love and romance, relationship music, which is really important and near and dear to my heart, is that we have a clear understanding to the path as to the path of love and what love is, you know. So the music is about that, and I enjoy it. And I think it's also one of the toughest things I had to do because initially a lot of the stuff was just solo. I didn't have background singers and didn't have a band. And so that was one of the first times I was doing something where it was really all about me. I had to make sure I was together. And I was the only one I had to take care of. And then eventually we brought in the band and the background singers, and it takes a little bit off of you. But initially it was one of the hardest things I had to do because I had always considered myself soft-spoken and introverted to a point. And as a younger man, as I matured, I couldn't afford to be introverted. I had to speak out about things more because it was important to have a voice. And then it's even more important now. So, yeah, music is still a great part. I have 2 studios I work from normally, and I just keep writing, doing different things for different people as well.
So you've got only you are singing only inside the USA, or you've got some concerts outside your country as well?
No, outside the music goes via iTunes and some of the other companies that sell my music, but mainly iTunes is all around the world, you know, because I think America's small compared to the overall market of the world. You know, I don't think that most people get that in America, you know.
Could you compare the passion to the singing is on the same level as it was with the basketball in the past?
Absolutely, because um, music, if you do it right, has to be a passion-driven thing. it has to be your passion, and in everything you write, play, and sing, because I play keys, bass, and a little acoustic. It all has to derive from the real part of you,
Mm-hmm.
from here, from the inside out. And
Mm-hmm.
if you do it from the outside, the problem with it is it can be so confused by all these other thoughts and things. And then you think that it's about fame. For me, it's never been about fame. I do what I love, what I'm passionate about, and I'm very productive at it because of the grace of God on my life to do it. I don't try to do everything, just what I know I'm supposed to do.
Mm-hmm. And last question. I really like to, during my interviews, asking about some ratings. And if you could create your own team with the players you played, your teammates, on the forward, we've got Terry Cummings. We've got 4 more positions. Who would be in your team? All-time Terry Cummings from his NBA career.
Probably at their peaks. I probably wouldn't even be a power forward. I'd probably be a small forward who could
Okay.
play
Uh-huh.
power forward and center. But because I would have a Bill Walton in his prime, uninjured at center, and because just talking about guys I played with. I played with a lot of great guys. But in their prime, probably David Robinson would be a power forward, which to me is his literal position, or more defined. If I played power forward, he played a small forward because he was never really that power guy.
Mm-hmm.
He was always more of a finesse guy who was forced into playing center because he was the biggest guy on the team.
Yeah, that's right.
And I would do something different with the guard. I would I would play a Rod Strickland, at point, because I think with time with that team, he would have been better and better. He never got used to San Antonio. And my 2 guard would always be between Ricky Pierce and Sidney Moncrief.
Mm-hmm. So good defense for sure. This team would have really good defense.
Yeah, and offense too, and wouldn't have to depend on one person to do it.
Mm-hmm. Terry, it was my last question. Thank you very much for time you spent and for our conversation. And hope that everything will be okay at your concert soon after this Corona days. And thank you very much again.
No problem. Thank you for having me.